Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the InnerViews. In today's video, we're going to break down how Zidane's 4-4-2 helped Real Madrid overcome Valencia. When we break it all down and we do look at the board, like I said, we have Real Madrid in more of a 4-4-2 against Valencia also playing in a 4-4-2. Real Madrid have Hazard floating around Benzema, and then they had Toni Kroos kind of shifted out towards the left with Valverde playing from the right. So what we can see from Real Madrid's shape here is that they were worried about Gaia and Daniel breaking forward, so they had Kroos and Valverde out in those wider areas for their discipline to shut down that threat. The other factor into Zidane moving into this 4-4-2 was based off the fact that Tyrrell and Kondogbia could run that midfield. So if you have Kroos and Valverde shifting into that central zone as well, that is 4v2, but it also forces Ferran Torres and Soler into those narrow positions, which creates a gap for Ferland Mendy and Carvajal to run at Gaia and Waz. And more importantly, it also gives Eden Hazard the opportunity to shift into those zones to get into 1v1 situations. Before we break down how Real Madrid did look to break down this Valencia side, we have to say that their pressing from the front was pivotal to them stopping Valencia from building out of the back. When they looked to press from the front, they would have Benzema and Hazard ahead of the center backs, and you would see Kroos shift out to Daniel Waz. When Kroos shifts out to Daniel Waz, that means that you have Modric ahead of Kondogbia, and then Casemiro is tasked with pushing out to Parejo. One of the issues that Real Madrid did encounter in that midfield zone when they were pressing high was if Rodrigo would drop off a bit deeper. You want Casemiro to pick him up, but if Casemiro picks him up, that means that he can't step into Parejo for Kroos. So what you end up seeing happening here was the fact that if Kroos did shift out to Waz and Casemiro was pushing into Rodrigo, then what would happen here was that you would see Modric shift out into the path of Parejo, and then you would have Valverde shifting across to close down Kondogbia, and that's how Real Madrid coped with that threat. There were times where you would see Soler drop off a bit narrow, and then Valverde would step into that path, and that's when you would need a center back to push to Rodrigo if you did have Casemiro pushing into Parejo with Rodrigo dropping off a bit deeper. But nevertheless, that was predominantly how Real Madrid stopped Valencia from building out of the back. And the only issue that Real Madrid had in that opening half was when Valencia were able to break that press. And there were times where we ended up seeing Courtois have to make a quality save to push the ball off the post. And there was a time where he did have to run off his line to clear danger because that Real Madrid press was breached. But besides that, Real Madrid didn't really encounter many issues from Valencia breaking forward. And this game was about how Real Madrid would find an avenue towards goal behind that Valencia defense. Nevertheless, when Real Madrid did have possession, it still felt like more of a 4-3-3 as Kroos was tucked in narrow, and it felt like it was Kroos and Modric against Parejo and Kondogbia. What we ended up seeing from Real Madrid's overall shape was that with Kroos tucked in, that created space for Mendy to push beyond Ferran Torres, and then out on the right-hand side, we did see a bit of variation from Valverde. There were times where he would hold the touchline and he would have Carvajal a bit narrow, but there were also other times where he would shift in a bit central, and that would allow Carvajal to push forward. We would see Kroos in the center of that pitch look to drop off a bit deeper to split the center backs to get on the ball, and there were times where he dropped off into a narrow position in that left channel, and that forced Ferran Torres to push out to get towards him. When you look to Luka Modric, he was often looking to push forward into advanced positions. There were times where you saw him ahead of Mangala and Gaia, and he would be dropping off to get on the ball. We did see Modric look to dart into space behind Gaia if that was available, and he was adventurous by looking to make runs beyond Mangala in between the two center backs. Luka Modric was trying to provide support for Benzema and Hazard, whereas Kroos was dropping off a bit deeper and looking to set the tempo. When we look to Benzema and Hazard, Benzema was often shifting laterally, looking to receive the ball in the gaps between the fullbacks and the center backs, but there were times where he was drifting out into those touchline positions to provide width and link play with his teammates. There was also a period where we ended up seeing Hazard and Benzema in space between Daniel Waz and Guillemin, and perhaps that was them trying to isolate Guillemin and Waz to get into good goal-scoring positions. Hazard was doing the same thing, mostly floating centrally to create space for Mendy, but there were times where he did drop off deeper, and it was a bit odd that we didn't see more of Hazard shifting to that left touchline to run at Daniel Waz, who isn't the greatest 1v1 defender. So as you can see, once again, Real Madrid did have issues creating chances throughout this game, but they did have an avenue out in the wider areas, with Modric and Kroos dropping deeper away from pressure and Casemiro having a free role in between Rodrigo and Maxi Gomez. They were able to shift the ball out into the wider areas based off the fact that Ferran Torres and Soler were very narrow. So Mendy was often an outlet for Modric, and then Casemiro and Toni Kroos were often shifting out the ball to Dani Carvajal, and it was Carvajal in particular who got Madrid into very good goal-scoring positions. If we look to one example, it's Kroos wrapping the ball around Soler for Carvajal pushing forward. And when Soler does shift across, Carvajal wraps the ball around him for Modric dropping off Gaia. We end up seeing Modric lay the ball off to Carvajal. And that's when you have Kondogbia shifting over and Modric ahead of Gaia. And with Carvajal going 1v1 with Soler, he's able to get a lucky bounce and break forward into right half space. And before Mangala can come across, he pokes a low effort at Silicen that is kicked away. Later on in that half, we ended up seeing Casemiro wrap the ball around Soler into the path of Carvajal pushing forward. And with Soler and Gaia stepping towards Carvajal, we end up seeing Valverde make an overlapping run to take Gaia out of position. And that allows Carvajal to locate Benzema darting in between Waz and Guillemin. And we also see Hazard darting across Guillemin and Mangala in towards the box. So when Carvajal delivers that cross into the box, it allows Benzema to get into a good goal scoring position, but he nods that ball across goal. And we look to one more example. It's Casemiro shifting out the ball to Valverde ahead of a narrow Soler. And this time Valverde locates Carvajal running forward beyond Gaia to shift the ball out into that right channel. You have Hazard drifting into right half space ahead of Mangala. And once again, it is Benzema darting in between Guillemin and Daniel Waz breaking towards the 6-yard box. And this time we end up seeing Carvajal deliver a quality ball into that 6-yard box, but Guillemin does a good job of clearing it so that Benzema can't test Silicen. The other key talking point here was the combination play between Eden Hazard and Benzema. Madrid struggled to get the ball into those two players in the earlier stages based off Valencia's narrow shape and also because the avenues were vacant out in those wider areas, and we did see Benzema often shift into those zones. But when they were able to combine, it was mostly in transition, and that's when they were able to get into some of their better goal scoring positions. When we break down an example of that combination play, it stems with Guillemin towards the halfway line looking to play the ball around Eden Hazard stepping into his path. And what we see in this build-up is that we have Modric stepping into the path of Kondogbia. You have Soler drifting central into a gap between Valverde and Casemiro. And what you end up seeing there is that Casemiro is looking to step into the path of Tyrrell, who is positioning himself in between Kroos and Modric. But when Guillemin looks to play that ball across Hazard, Modric does a good job of stepping in to win it, and he instantly splits Kondogbia and Tyrrell to find Hazard where Guillemin steps into his path. Hazard ends up dropping the ball off to Modric, and that's where we end up seeing Kroos running off Tyrrell into that gap in that left channel beyond Daniel Waz, who was pushed higher up the pitch. When he plays the ball into Toni Kroos, we end up seeing Hazard instantly running off Guillemin, and that's when we see Kroos wrap the ball around Guillemin into the path of Benzema ahead of Mangala. And when Mangala does shift over, Benzema instantly plays it into the path of Hazard, breaking in towards the box freely, but Guillemin's pressure does force Hazard to shoot quickly, and his low shot is saved by Silicen. And the other example that we can look at stems from a transitional play where we end up having Valverde looking to push forward in towards that Valencia half, with Kondogbia looking to retreat his position and Jose Gaya in an advanced position. So what we end up seeing from Valverde is that from his own half, he wraps the ball around Tyrrell into the path of Hazard in between the center backs, and Hazard looks to instantly slide it across Guilherme for Benzema peeling off him, but Guilherme does a very good job of making a last-ditch tackle, and he guides the ball off Benzema's foot, and that ball goes out of play. But as you can see, Benzema and Hazard in transition posed legitimate threats for that Valencia backline, and it continued to cause them havoc in that second half. And the build-up to Madrid's winner stems from a similar template following the introduction of Kevin Gameiro and Guedj. What we end up seeing is that Guedj does win the ball from a loose Kroos touch and drops it off to Kondogbia, and he ends up playing it into the path of Parejo, who slides the ball across a narrow Mendy into the path of Gameiro, shifting into that right channel. When Gameiro shifts into that right channel, Sergio Ramos does track that run with Waz overlapping, but Ramos ends up winning that challenge, and the ball ends up falling into the path of Hazard, who's now able to break in transition. Hazard once again cuts across Kondogbia and slides the ball to Modric, but Hazard instantly darts into that path between Kondogbia and Guilherme, and we end up seeing Modric split Kondogbia and Parejo and Guilherme and Mangala to find Hazard goal side of Guilherme, and he ends up sliding the ball across goal to Benzema, running across Gaya to tap that effort into the net. But that's what we ended up seeing from Hazard and Benzema. When they did win the ball in transition, Hazard's speed and his dribbling allowed him to get into good positions, and then we had Benzema often looking to isolate a defender with his run, and that's how he was able to link play with Hazard. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.